Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining in. My name is Ujjwal, and I'll be taking you through the webinar today. Today, the title of the webinar is Elevating Education, Embracing Blended and Flipped Learning Models. Primarily, what we would want to cover today is giving you a brief idea about how we would define blended and flipped learning methods. Why aren't they very common in the current ecosystem? How Mobius can help you implement those very effectively, and why are they necessary as we move towards future educational landscape. And we've, again, as I mentioned, we've kept a few minutes at the end for Q&A, but if you have any questions during the session, if there's anything that you would want us to cover, feel free to put it in the chat or in the Q&A section. Yeah, so let's get started. Again, and this has been since the pandemic. You might have seen or attended a lot of talks and webinars where people would have talked about hybrid and blended, flipped learning, inverted classroom, and phygital learning. And again, there are so many terms that are now used very extensively. So the first thing that I would want to do is clarify that and define what it is that we would like to establish as blended or flipped. For us, we feel anything that is an integration of an inside class experience and an outside class experience, we would classify that as a blended or a flipped program. So think of something like this. You feel you'd want to share some notes to our students when they've studied inside the classroom. You share a PDF, that we would consider that to be a blended learning process. You gave some homework to our students, want them to try out a few problems in a textbook, that would also be a blended or a flipped education model. So anything that would primarily that you're looking at going through inside and outside class, trying to combine both, is you would classify them as blended or flipped learning models. Again, there might be different definitions that people would use, but the goal would still be the same. So before we get started, one thing that I would want to clarify, and this is something that we'll be doing a couple more times during the session, we'd want to understand, based upon your experience with blended learning, how effective do you think that has been? So we've launched a poll. Feel free to participate on the same. We'll keep it on for about a minute or so, and then we'll move on. So this becomes very important for us because we've realized that a lot of faculties since the pandemic have used a lot of different tools, sometimes out of necessity and sometimes out of being able to even just being able to extend something that was used in COVID, and they've been able to do it past the pandemic too. So this is something that you would want to understand so that we can curate the messaging of the webinar accordingly. So majority what we've seen is primarily attendees feel that blended learning is extremely effective. So again, this is something that we feel as well. It can be extremely effective, but obviously you would need the right approach to implement it as well. So let's get started. Now, we'll move on to primarily looking at what does a blended learning approach would be. In the most simplest of terms, blended would allow you to just have more time. Currently, if you think of it just in a class environment, which is very common, let's say 5, 6, 10 years ago, instruction or studying that a student was expected to do would just happen inside the classroom. If you're able to incorporate like a blended or a flipped approach, you basically just have more time for instruction, which again becomes very useful because already you have less time and a lot of time has to go into completing curriculum. So if you're able to utilize some time outside the classroom, that can be very impactful. What this also brings is an enhanced experience. So if a student is studying, you are able to implement blended very well. That means a student is able to utilize some digital resources outside the classroom. That basically means his regular teaching process allows him to be even more engaged in the next classroom. So it is not just something that happens outside. You are able to actually see the effects of it in the in-class experience as well. Obviously, it provides a lot more structure to a student because again, very big classroom that you normally deal with. So it becomes a little bit difficult to actually manage uh, uh, just regular in-class experiences, right? So being able to provide some more structure to students when they are outside as well can be very important. And lastly, what this can actually do is allow you to make interventions. So if you're able to understand, okay, this homework I gave to students, they're not able to do this very well, or maybe took a lot of time. So this allows you to then implement, make some sort of intervention. It could be maybe helping them with problems, maybe giving them more materials or resources to go through. So that is ideally why blended and flipped would actually uh, be what do these things will actually give you. Uh, Again, all that I've said, most of people would agree with it. But the problem becomes it becomes very difficult to implement. So the challenge becomes again, if you want a student to go back home and open something, because this is now an outside class learning experience is what you would want to structure, where does a student get motivation to open whatever it is, whether it's a PDF, look at a video, the resource is something that is not very relevant, but student doesn't really have the motivation to open even their notes, textbooks, videos, PPTs, whatever it is. And additionally, you don't have a lot of control when you're not physically present. This is something that instructors faced a lot when they were doing a virtual classroom through Zoom. So definitely with this lot of control, you don't really get students behaving in a way that you want them to. And especially if you're not there, how do you measure the effectiveness? Because inside the classroom, you can do it pretty well, right? You explain something and you see right there on the student's face whether they've understood this or not. Or you might ask a question. So you do have a lot of ways to measure effectiveness inside the class. But what to do outside the class? Sure, assessment is a way to do it, but you can't really take a lot of assessments because, again, time inside the class is also very valuable for you. So these are very common challenges that normally do build up when you're trying to implement uh, flipped learning models primarily for STEM courses. And this is where we come in. So primarily we, Digital have a product called Mobius. And the goal is to being able to curate a more engaging experience for a student. So the students motivated to come, and more importantly, we are able to measure how they're accessing the content as well. So that information can be useful to you. So what I'll do now is I'll take you through a short demonstration of the product. And we'll just talk about how learning experience here can be very, very different to going over a regular learning experience, which you might be taking place currently in your institutes. We'd want to do, before I move on to the product, I'd also want to understand if you currently are using any other online learning system, could be like an LMS or Google Classroom or something like this that you're currently using. Basically using a structured way to share resources to students when they go back home. So again, this was used very extensively during COVID, but even post the pandemic, we've seen a lot of people stick to it. Obviously, it brings a lot of advantages. You're able to, as I mentioned, structure content very well. You're able to provide specific content to students that you feel would be necessary or helpful to them. So definitely the structuring it becomes a lot easier when you're doing it through a platform. And we'll basically give you an idea of how you'll be either able to use Mobius in the existing ecosystem you have, or even use it independently if you'd want to. Okay, so I guess most of the people have mentioned that they have been using an online learning system, so that is obviously great. Again, you will be able to get a very clear understanding of what value Mobius will be able to add with the existing systems. And also, we have a few people who've said that they are not using one. So again, then you can think of the regular ecosystem as student taking notes and going back and studying from their notes. So because that will always be the base that you'll have with yourself. So let's take a look at Mobius. So Mobius, as I mentioned, is an online learning platform. I won't spend a lot of detail on the product, on the functionalities of the product or the operational system. It is basically a login-based product hosted on a website. I won't talk about the technical details too much. We'll primarily look at how the content on Mobius looks different so that we can focus more towards implementing blended and flipped learning practices. So normally what would happen is you would share some resources to students. Could be a PDF, video, text-based content is primarily very frequent. And it could be that students are taking your notes and studying it, or maybe their own notes. So this is where we completely change it. So content on Mobius, obviously you can add text and videos and these basic raw form content, but we feel that the content in its rawest form is not very effective because again, we have the same challenges. Can you motivate a student to go through the content or not? Can you measure if the content was actually useful to a student or not? That doesn't necessarily happen. So with Mobius, when a student is going through content, obviously he'll be able to read and see videos or maybe even see images or anything, etc. that you would want to add. But a very key aspect of Mobius is you're also able to create learning breakdowns in the middle of the content. So right here, I'm going through content and I get to add a question that a student can try out and get an instant understanding of, okay, I just read this about 10 seconds ago. Did I understand this or not? So creates a very big difference between just somebody reading something or somebody learning something. And that is what we'd want to incorporate. So this becomes great as a self-check for students, but this also becomes very important for you as instructors, because as I mentioned, you will be also be able to understand how the content was accessed. So as an example, if you shared this content today, tomorrow you're able to see that majority of a class got this question wrong. So now you have an understanding of this particular concept not being very clear to students. In addition to this, sometimes it is not just being right or wrong, right? In most cases, students would also want to know where the mistakes were made. So you can also provide that if needed. So you'll be able to tell students, okay, this is where the mistakes were made. You'll be able to see detailed solutions to problems as well. Again, that's not the only way you'd want to add some level of engagement, but obviously something that is extremely important. Another way to do it is very important for STEM is mostly you'll have a lot of visual and a lot of practice or application based problems or concepts that you're explaining students. So there you'll be able to incorporate these applications in the middle of the content itself. So I'm explaining 4-band resistors to a student, very common in first year engineering, basic electrical engineering course. Student is able to try out with different colors and see different resistors being made. Now, obviously great, but you can share these sort of questions like applications externally as well, right? Could be GeoGebra, we also provide some applications. But the challenge then becomes, this becomes an optional resource for the students. Majority of them don't go through it. And very few who actually go through it are able to understand it very well. So with Mobius, additionally, what we'll also be able to do is add questions on the usage of the application too. So you'll also be able to see whether somebody has worked through the application or not, because again, this is also being tracked. So just trying to create some sort of difference between somebody going through a regular PDF and maybe just reading through, okay, what is third band, what does fourth band represent, in terms of them actually being able to try it out. Then again, something that a lot of students would actually need when they're going through is, sure, they have a question in the middle. You want them to try it out, and obviously you can provide them feedback as well. But now that I've seen the feedback, sure, I'm being told that there is issue with the slide. Just give me a second. There's a question. Okay. Sure. Let me just update the screen share again. Okay, just let me know if this is okay. Okay, great. I'll skip through. Okay, that means I've skipped through some content. I'll go through it again and do that a little quickly so that we are still on schedule. So as I mentioned, again, instead of just sharing PDFs, Mobius allows you to add breakdowns in the middle of the content itself. So the advantage obviously is clear, becomes great for self-check, and also becomes great because all of this information is being tracked. So these are not questions like quizzes or assignments because marks are not really involved. So there's no pressure for a student to get it wrong. Uh, and primarily objective becomes for somebody to be able to just go through it themselves and get just use it as self-check. So again, if I get it wrong and if I get it right, I have some motivation to figure out why that is. And great as compared to getting some quiz results 2 or 3 weeks later. So instantly, I get an understanding of what happens. Another thing that you can do is incorporate applications. So again, we also provide some applications. You can use any other resource that you would want, like PHET, GeoGebra, virtual labs, whatever application you want to bring from. And student will basically be able to make changes to example. Here is a 4-band circuit and or 4-band resistor rather. You'll be able to make changes to the same. And you see changes here. But instead of just being the application, you then ask questions on the working of the application. So it just doesn't become optional for students. And finally, as I was covering through, is when your students want to practice, right? Once they've tried out a problem and they got it wrong, what happens then? If you've given them feedback or if you've given them the complete solution, now they just know the answer. So they can type it up and they can simply move on. And if I got it wrong, what I would want to practice it more, right? So with Mobius, additionally, what you'll be able to do is create randomized questions. So when I put one question, I can click on try another, and you'll notice the values will keep on changing. So this is not me pulling questions from a question bank. This is the platform that automatically generates these questions for me. So I can get it wrong once, and I can try it out 5 times if I want to. So this can be great for different students who have very different learning experiences. Now, especially with STEM, we do notice something that I've shown you, and a lot of people who are covering STEM, two problems normally arise. Is when you're actually grading and want to assess STEM, these basic question types that I've shown you are not enough. Like MCQs and numbers, these are not sufficient. Like STEM needs a lot more. So with Mobius, we're able to do that too. So when you're actually assessing, we'll be able to even grade mathematical expressions. So say the answer is r equal to 3. Somebody goes ahead and answers r by 3 equal to 1. Both of them would be correct. So these small things, again, feels like a small thing, but if you're actually teaching any course where you want to grade math, it becomes very problematic. And with Mobius, you would be able to. And again, I picked an example for equations. It could be matrices and integrals and any mathematical expression that you want. You can also create chemical equations. So when you're dealing with maybe engineering chemistry as a course, you'll be able to deal with that too. And use arrows and enter chemical equations. And like the system is able to understand mathematical equivalence, it can understand chemical equivalence too. When you move towards physics-based courses, you can handle free body diagrams. So enter any image that you want. Student gets to draw a force like they would draw anyhow. And even this gets graded automatically, like everything else. And again, if it is being used for practice, then I can see my solution set too. Maybe you're explaining code to a student, could be in CS or could be as you're teaching a computer algebra system to a student in a math course. Identify errors in this code. So there are very simple constructs that your regular systems and LMSs or other tools that you would be using, those do not provide you a lot of functionality when you're dealing with STEM. So this is where we add value, because you'll be able to handle a lot of these constructs. Again, these are just some examples. Obviously, there's a lot more we can do. Another big change that normally when we talk to faculties, they do ask us is, my questions, I don't only ask the final answer. Like, my questions are very long. So in a lot of cases, I would want to answer the complete question. What do I do in that case? So I'll give you an example. Basic electrical engineering, analyze the circuit. Again, understand the question isn't necessarily important. What you need to know is this question has 5-6 different steps. Now, just if a student gets it wrong, and giving him a 2-page solution to a problem is not really great. So what we do is we guide a student through the problem. So obviously I'm wrong. I'm guided through the solution on a step-by-step basis. Okay. Step 1, step 2, step 3, and you can decide to be, because as I mentioned, it's very important for you to have control over what a student is accessing outside. So you get to curate it the way that you would want. So you want this to be more descriptive, you want this to be more responsive, completely up to you. Like, you could have asked students to enter equations themselves instead of just showing it there. But then being able to layer this into multiple parts, what this does is now a student knows where it is that they're actually making mistakes. And obviously, once they get it wrong, they can try out different problem. And notice that this time the values in the circuit diagram would also change. So it does allow for personalized practice, which becomes very advantageous. And not just the final answer, as I mentioned, it can be a structured, layered solution as well. So when you're sharing a lot of content, these things become very important. And as I mentioned, it is not necessarily just you being able to just share, give out content, right? Because if you do that, it basically becomes optional for students to access. You should also be able to understand how it was used by students. So we provide you analytics on the same. Maybe you shared lesson yesterday and I'll be able to see, okay, 60 students open it. On average, they spend 25 minutes on it. Makes sense. Where did they actually spend time on? In lessons, where did they actually spend time on? They did not go through videos that I opened up. So now I add questions in the middle of my videos. I even look at lessons and maybe see, okay, this question inside the lesson that I had, this question, student got incorrect the most number of times. They try to practice it the most number of times. Then immediately I go ahead and try to explain it. So we do not want this to become optional. We want you to be able to get an understanding of where the learning gaps are for your class, and then be able to fix it as well. So broadly, in very brief, this is what Mobius allows you to do. Now, I will spend a little bit of time talking about why is this important. Now, for a lot of your post-COVID era, where students were introduced to technology, it is necessary for them to who've switched to technology at some portion to continue with that. So there is some level of technology integration that definitely needs to take place. And more importantly, it will even enhance with the students that will come up. So 4 or 5 years later, you'll see a lot of students who've studied during their schooling, and they've done a lot of their education has been technology enabled, right? So when they come to a completely board classroom, that won't work great for them. By board, I meant a whiteboard based classroom. They will need some level of tech enablement there too. So we have a couple of success stories across the world. I'll cover Imperial College of London, again, a very premium institute. They're using Mobius extensively with over 12,000 students and across 300 courses. And this is what allows them to do it, handle very quick assessment, share content. They'll be able to develop their own MOOC courses, and they're using it in their other campuses too. So it becomes very streamlined. And more importantly, it is not just optional content. You get to have a feel of how the content was accessed, whether it was effective or not. Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. That is also one of our very big success stories. What they have been able to do is even take a lot of their course content online and now able to deliver completely online education too, because that is how strong the flipped process was. So this just wanted to give you a brief about how this is being used outside from other institutes too. And broadly, this is what I wanted to cover. Sure, if there are any questions, I'll just have a look in the Q&A section. Feel free to put them across and I'll be very happy to answer them. But again, this is just a brief of the product. Obviously, if you would want to have a very detailed discussion or maybe have a curated demo, feel free to reach us out. You can write to us at info@digitaled.in and we'll be very happy to align somebody and they'll be able to do a curated demo for your specific requirements. So again, I'll wait for a couple more minutes. If there are any questions, we'll be happy to take them. Okay, great. I guess we don't have a lot of questions today. So again, thanks everybody. Thanks for joining in. This should be it from our end. Great. Thanks, Pawan sir. Thank you for your message. So again, as I mentioned, if anybody would you like to know about the product itself, feel free to reach out to us. You have our emails. We'll also be sharing you a recording of the webinar in a couple of days. So feel free to watch it over or share it with somebody. Yeah, that's it from our end. So I guess if there are no questions, I will be ending the webinar. And again, thanks everybody. Thanks for joining in.